Hey guys, it's Multiplier. We're with Recording Essentials, having a look at some mixing concepts, and we're looking at the stereo image. Now, whenever we're making music, we are dealing with two channels, a left channel and a right channel. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're using headphones, speakers, laptops, whatever. Fundamentally, you've got two channels of audio. All the music we make has two channels. And then using these two channels, we can create what's called a stereo image. Now this stereo image it's nice to kind of visualize it, but it's like a space. Now for some people, it's a pretty like two-dimensional or a one-dimensional space. But if you factor in the use of things like reverb, you can actually create a full-on three-dimensional space from these two speakers. And it's kind of up to you how exactly you do that, but you want to be using the whole of this stereo space. Now, the basic idea is if the same sound is happening out of both speakers at the same time, it sounds like it's coming out the center. Kind of tricks your brain into thinking, right, stuff's happening in the center right about now. Whereas if it's coming out of just one side or just the other side, it's coming at you from an angle, it's coming at you from the sides. And it's also worth noting that the stereo image kind of sounds different if it's coming from speakers versus headphones. So you have to kind of understand, kind of depending on how you're listening to things, exactly how things should sound and kind of factor in how it will sound on other setups too. But how does this affect the mix? So when we're creating the mix, one of the ways we can separate elements, because one of the key ideas in mixing is having all the elements fitting together so you can kind of pick out each individual element, whether it's the bass or the lead or the vocal, without them all kind of interfering and kind of getting in each other's way. And obviously you can do things like EQ and compression to allow these things to fit together. But one of the simplest ways is just good old-fashioned stereo imaging. I put in them at different points in the stereo image to basically allow them to coexist, but in different places. That way your brain can really tell, right, my kicks are here, my pads are everywhere, my leads are here, my hi-hats are over here, whatever else it is, you can kind of put it in its own space. And there aren't really any hard and fast rules. I'd say the only real rules are you always really want your kicks pretty much all the times, especially if you want them to be played by DJs in clubs. You need your kicks to be coming out the middle in the center. And the reason for this is, well, there's two reasons. First of all, the most powerful sounds come from the center because they're coming from two speakers at the same time. Fundamentally, if you want it powerful, it has to come from the center. If you put it to the sides, yes, they can still sound powerful, but if you put it in the center, they'd always sound more powerful. So you always want your kicks to be in the center, so they're powerful. You also run into issues like phasing whenever you have bass coming out of two speakers at the same time, kind of quite wide sounds. So I certainly wouldn't really recommend putting basses anywhere except in the middle. Although if you want to get really creative, you can give it a go. But yeah, you pretty much want your bass in your center as well. Otherwise, it's pretty much fair game what you do. Now, the common practice is to put things like the leads in the center, your pads around the sides, and kind of maybe percussion elements around the side and the snares in the middle. But to be honest, I'm going to say it's up to you. Providing you're making these decisions, it doesn't matter what the decisions are. But you do have to make these decisions. You have to decide when you're making the track, how am I filling the image? What's going on in the center? What's going on in the sides? And does that make sense? Is that what I want to achieve? So enough talking, let's give you some examples so you can actually hear what I mean. So we have this track that I finished a few weeks ago called Get It. It's featuring a vocalist called Say. And basically what I did is I used the stereo image to quite a nice effect here. So I had the bass in the middle. In fact, I'll play the whole thing just so you have a rough idea of what's going on.
Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money. Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money. Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money. Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money.
So what I did is when I was making this mix, I kind of made some decisions. I started off with the kick and the bass and decided, right, that needs to be in the middle. So I put the bass in the middle. Dead center. That way it's powerful and it's doing its job. Now, I also wanted the vocals to be in the center. Now, because the vocals were at a different, well, I've actually got a few layers of vocals, so I wanted the main vocal to be in the center. And because the vocals sit at a different frequency range to this particular bass, it's not a very distorted bass, I knew they would sit together fine in the middle because they're at different frequencies. So I put the center vocal, which will be this one, right in the center too.
Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money. Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money.
It's pretty central. It's not super central. It's got a touch of width to it, a touch of dimension, but it's pretty central. And that's because it's the main vocal. I wanted it to be center of attention, and I wanted it to be loud and always sound good and kind of be the main point of interest. I really wanted that in the center. But then what I did is I have these what's called ad-libs from, it's basically just kind of weird little vocal things around the side. So what I wanted to do with these is use various effects and stuff to basically put them in the side around the central vocal. So by themselves, they sound a bit like this.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
See how they're kind of swirling around the side? That just kind of means it's taken a little bit out of the way and leaves the main vocal right in the center. You'll also notice that the main vocal doesn't really have much reverb.
Get it, gotta get it, I get it, I gotta get my money.
Kind of has a touch of room reverb from when he recorded it, but it doesn't really have this big echoey reverb. It's really central, and that also gives it power. The more reverb you add, the less power, because it kind of puts it in a space. But what I did is I put quite a lot of reverb and delay on the ad-libs, because basically if you put reverb on something, it also puts it somewhere in the stereo image. It puts it kind of everywhere in the stereo image. It's almost like stuff with reverb goes to the back, like general space around you, and then stuff that doesn't have reverb kind of stays right, if you listen to headphones, kind of right in your head and kind of right very central. So you don't just have to treat the stereo image as center, left, right. You've also got this kind of three-dimensional thing where stuff that doesn't have reverb stays kind of in the center, nice and clean, nice and simple, nice and powerful, and then stuff with reverb kind of sits everywhere else in the distance, almost kind of around the sides. And the nice thing with that is you can get leads and vocals that kind of contain similar frequencies to sit together nicely by putting one with no reverb or very, very little reverb, and then one with quite a lot of reverb, because then the one with no reverb sits in the center, and then things with loads of reverb kind of sits everywhere else around it, so they kind of sit together. So I personally think of the stereo image as this kind of three-dimensional space. I did a similar thing with the lead as well. So if you notice this lead sound, this is a super wet reverb sound. Now, it did happen to be the way I designed the preset as part of a sample pack anyway, but I really chose this on purpose because what it does is the whole lead is just in this three-dimensional reverb space, which just kind of means that the vocal can kind of stay in the middle and not get in its way. So it's all about kind of making these decisions so everything kind of fits into that stereo image. I'll give you another example. Do I have another example on this track? I don't know, but to be honest, I mean that covers the basic ideas. You've got, providing you're putting things in a space, perfectly fine. Doesn't matter where the space goes. Like, in fact, yeah, let's load up another track because I think in this track I did something with the stereo image as well, except I did it in a slightly different way. So this next track I'm loading up is called Sunday Night. It's still technically an unfinished track, although I had to put up a preview of what it currently is, at least on my SoundCloud. But what I did in this next track, while it's loading, I'll talk you through it. So typically you'd have your main vocal in the center. But what I decided to do with this Sunday Night track is keep the bass in the center. The bass has quite a lot of mids in it, but because there's only really the bass and the vocal in it, I decided to try and do some creative things with the stereo image with the main vocal. So if I play the main drop bit that I'm kind of talking about, you hopefully see exactly what I mean. Oh, let's turn off the master. That's going to make it too loud and take up all my CPU. Listen to the vocal on the bass. See how the vocal tends to sit right on the sides? Some of the vocals are in the middle, but most of it sits right on the sides. Now, I did that intentionally so that the bass kind of sits in the middle and the vocals kind of live around it, and it gives it just the more interesting sort of sound, especially if you're wearing headphones or even speakers. You can hear the vocals kind of dancing around, and you notice how some of them kind of dart from one side to the other. Some of them are just wide sounds, and some of them are right in the middle, so it's kind of dancing around the place. It's really, really nice. I'll kind of solo the vocal so you can hear what I did.
Chip, that the anchor. They gonna holla. Push it little further, push it little further. She bad for murder, she bad for murder. Chip, that the anchor. Scream, they gonna holla, they gonna holla. Push it little further, push it little further. She bad for murder, she bad for murder. Chip, that.
So you find I just kind of gave it this really nice, it's kind of interesting. And it's kind of using the stereo image to do some interesting things. And even the central sound, I used a kind of a different room reverb to the side sounds, just to kind of put it in yet a different space, so it didn't just sound like a boring central vocal. So it's all interesting stuff, I think, and certainly with vocals don't tend to dance around easier. It's just nice and interesting. It kind of breaks some of the rules, but that's all part of the fun, right? The bass was pretty standard and pretty centrally, so I thought, yeah, let's do something interesting with the stereo stuff with the vocals. And it's also worth noting that you can make central sounds wide, and there's a few ways of doing it. Now, my general bit of advice is if the sound isn't naturally wide, it's not very easy to make it sound wide by using kind of delays to kind of force a stereo, like a wide effect, because it doesn't sound very natural. It's a lot better if you want to get a central sound to sound wide, either use some room reverb to kind of make it wide by putting it in the distance in some space, or just try and use some panning, or this is quite a common vocal trick, especially with like rap vocals, where you do 2 takes of exactly the same thing, but then you put 1 take in one ear and one take in the other ear, so that you're kind of saying the same thing, which means your brain considers it 1 vocal take, but because they're subtly different, it kind of tricks your brain into thinking it's wide because they're 2 different things are coming from the side, but it's also the same thing, so your brain kind of thinks it's the same sound quite wide, if that makes sense. You can also do a similar thing with synths, especially if you're making your own presets or you still have the preset. I am going to say if you want to make it wide, don't force it wide with effects. Make it wide with kind of within the synth using Unison. Check out my video on Unison for details on how that works, but that's really got to be the way you want to make a synth sound wide, is using Unison. It's not by making it central and then trying to force it wide later, because it sounds unnatural. If you can make things naturally wide and naturally sit in their own space, it just sounds a lot better. And yeah, that's the stereo image. And I know dance music doesn't tend to be that interesting with the stereo image, especially compared to pretty much every other genre of music, but I'm going to say it's certainly something that I'm looking to do a lot more of. Don't be afraid of trying these things, because it makes it more interesting at the end of the day. And you'd be surprised how, even though a lot of club systems are in mono, and there's a lot of reasons why a lot of things should be in mono, who cares at the end of the day? If it sounds cool and people like it and you like it, that's all good. It's all good. Don't play to the rules too much. Just make decisions and take advantage of all the potential. I use the stereo image, but don't try and follow all the rules, because there are lots of websites that say this must be here, this must be there, but don't worry about that. Just make sure you're putting things somewhere, basically. And yeah, that's it. The stereo image. I've been Multiplier. It's been Recording Essentials, and this has been a mixing concept. Hope you enjoy stereo imaging.